So the other day I had an accident that got me a fast pass to the front of the line at the ER. And I contemplated on whether or not to even make this video because from looking at me, you'd have no idea. I've got all 10 fingers, all 10 toes. I didn't have anything hit me in the face. I could have never made this video and you guys would have never known the difference. However, if making this video can prevent this from happening to somebody else and being more serious of an injury than what I encountered, then I think it'll be well worth it. So what happened? Well, we had just gotten a new attachment for the back of the tractor that you guys probably saw in our last video. And as most manufacturers do, they send the PTO shafts longer than what most tractors need so that they can accommodate a wide range of different PTO geometries for different machines. And this was no exception. Our PTO shaft on that new attachment was about 18 inches too long from what I needed to fit my LS MT 357. And in order to make it fit so that it doesn't damage the implement or damage the tractor, you have to cut the PTO shaft down. And this is something that I have done 3 or 4 times in the past. Every attachment that I get for the back of the tractor that's PTO driven, typically the PTO shaft will need cut down. And in the past, I have always used a Sawzall with a metal cutting blade. And if you're not familiar with a PTO shaft, I have them sitting here. Basically, this end hooks up to the splines on the PTO of your tractor, and this end hooks up to the splines of the gearbox on the attachment. And then these two combine in the center and they telescope. So, you know, as you raise and lower, they have the ability to adjust. And so you have to make sure that when you raise up your PTO implement, it's not going to jam one side or the other, either into your gearbox of the attachment or into the splines of the PTO of the tractor. So again, I was in a position where I needed to cut the PTO shaft. In the past, I've always used a Sawzall. And I did use a Sawzall for the first half. I took the tractor side of the attachment and I used the Sawzall and I cut all the way through. Again, cutting about 18 inches off of the PTO. Now, a Sawzall works, done it that way a bunch of times, but it is incredibly slow. And I don't know if it was my impatience or if it was 85 degrees, hot and sunny, and I was tired of sitting out in the sun sweating, but I wanted to do it faster. And I think that's where it got me, because that's when I picked this up, a 4.5 inch quartered angle grinder. And if you just made that face, yeah, you probably know where I'm headed with this. So I take my PTO shaft and I've got it sitting here, right? Now, holding this, you've got to hold it with one hand and use the angle grinder with the other, which going forward, I will never operate one of these without two-handed operation. They do make, you know, a handle here that you can use to hold. And I think that's probably where I was a little bit lackadaisical in what I was doing, because I was holding the PTO shaft with this hand and I was grinding with this hand. And I had gotten about 99% of the way through. And I know that from cutting firewood poles with chainsaws and everything, I know the difference between tension and compression, right? As you're cutting something, this side is going to want to drop off. So you have tension on the top and compression on the bottom. So as I'm grinding this, I am, instead of just cutting right down through it like you would with a chainsaw, I am working my way around, right? Well, then I get to the very bottom. I've got it cut all the way through except for the last 1%. And I take the angle grinder, and instead of coming down from the top through this entire column, I want to get on the bottom side of it. Now at this point, I'm trying to lift this end up to get rid of that tension and compression. And as I start making that final cut, this thing just shoots out of my hand like a rocket right towards me, and it hits me in the chest. Now, I've been trying to decide whether I wanted to show the image of what happened to me, and I'm going to. I'm going to save it for the very end of the video, because I know that that can be gruesome and some people may not want to see that. So I want to give you guys plenty of notice, advance warning to click off the video before I show it. It'll be in the last 5 seconds of this video if you're one of the people that wants to see what an angle grinder can do to flesh. Now, another reason I'm saving that photo for the very end of the video is because if YouTube decides that that is against community guidelines, it'll be a lot easier for me to trim that last 5 seconds off of the video than it would be here in the middle. I did look up YouTube's community guidelines on showing injuries and wounds and gore like that, and they said that if your sole purpose is to disgust or shock your audience, then that is against community guidelines. But if there is enough context around it, then it is okay. They may just put an age restriction on the video. So I think I am providing enough context to show the injury. And again, the whole reason I'm doing this is because I want to prevent somebody else from having the same injury or worse. Now, I mentioned before it hit me right here in the chest, but as you can see, I do have just a scratch right here, and I have a smaller scratch on my stomach. And you can imagine if that angle grinder had hit me and made the deep cut right here instead of on my chest, I've got a lot less fat on my bicep than I do on my chest. The injury actually, it didn't get into my pectoral muscle, but it got right down to it. So that little bit of fat layer I've got on my chest here is what actually kept it from hitting muscle. But as you can see right here, there's no fat on my bicep. So that would have really done some damage on my bicep if it had made first contact there instead of on my chest. Now, if for whatever reason YouTube does deem that showing that picture is against community guidelines, I am going to remove it. So if you get to the end of the video and the picture is not there and you want to see it, to see what that type of injury looks like, you can go ahead and email me, hometownacres@outlook.com, and I will privately share that picture with you. So anyway, immediately after the angle grinder pinched and shot back towards me, you can see it immediately wound up in my shirt. And this is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this video, was to talk to you about the safety of these angle grinders. So this is not some old angle grinder from the 1980s. This is a modern angle grinder. I bought it 2 or 3 years ago. It's a good brand, Milwaukee. However, that being said, this angle grinder it doesn't have a trigger on it, right? Instead, it has a locking switch. So right there, this thing would be running without, like this. It would be running without me having a hand on it. And in talking with Kyle from Spicer Designs and neighbor Doug from One Eye Customs, they both have told me you've got to get a different style of angle grinder that has a trigger here that will act as a dead man switch. So if it does kick back and jumps out of your hands, it will at least start the process of slowing it down. Would it have prevented it from cutting me? Probably not. But at least it would have had, a half a second of slowing. Plus, when this hit me, it still had power to it, right? So not only was it not slowing down, but as it hit me, it still had power to it. So it hit me, cut me. I wasn't sure how bad it was. It immediately got wound up in my shirt. You can see it's still here and not coming out. It'll take me a minute to cut that out. And then because it wasn't in my hand, it was literally hanging in my shirt, and I still heard the engine humming, trying to spin the blade even though it was bound up. I finally got a grip on it again after about 3 or 4 seconds, hit the switch to turn it off, and then I immediately unplugged it, attached to my shirt because I couldn't get it off. It was wound up so tight in my shirt. Ran to the front door of the house. Luckily, Lana was home and yelled in the front door of the house, and I said, "Hey, Lana, had an accident with the angle grinder, come quick. I'm not sure how bad it is." The only thing I can see at this point, because my shirt is literally wound up so tight, is I could just barely look down under my shirt, and I could see that I was dripping blood pretty profusely down my chest and stomach. There's a pretty good little pile of blood in front of the front door while I was waiting for Lana to come out. We came out to the shop. She lifted it up, looked at it, said, "It doesn't look good." She said, "Do you have any scissors in your shop?" And I said, "I've got tin snips." So we came out here and cut it out of my shirt. And I obviously wanted to leave the little bit of shirt left in the angle grinder for the video purposes to show you what happened. That is the first time I've ever had a piece of clothing get tangled up in a power tool like that, and it happens so incredibly fast. I will say, I'm not going to sit here and say, "Oh, I've been using angle grinders for years and years and years. I feel very confident in them." As far as a chainsaw goes, and knock on wood, I feel much more confident using a chainsaw. I've been using them for a long time, and I know that people have been logging for years, have had issues with cutting the legs off with chainsaws or whatever. But I do feel like I am more safe with a chainsaw because I kind of have an idea of when to expect kickbacks with that piece of equipment. That being said, I do think there are a lot of people that use these that are not metal fabricators on a daily basis. So anyway, we called my parents. They came over. Meanwhile, I'm sitting at the house just holding pressure to the wound, waiting for my parents to come over to watch the kids so that Lana can take me to the ER. We get to the ER. There was probably 5 or 6 other people in the waiting room. I, again, had an open wound. There's benefits to bleeding in the ER is they'll get you right in. You get a fast pass to the front of the line. Got in there, and the doctor took a look at it, and he said, "So, what happened?" And I said, "Well, I had an angle grinder fly out of my hand and hit me right in the chest." And he said, "That is the number 2 most common tool that causes ER visits." And he said, "Any guesses what number 1 is?" And I said, "Probably chainsaws." And he said, "Yep." And I said, "What's number 3?" And he said, "Table saws." And I said, "Well, given that track record, this probably won't be the last time you'll see me because I use all 3 of those pretty regularly. I'll try to be safer next time though." So anyway, he looked at it, got some anesthetic in it so I couldn't feel anything, flushed out the wound. They did pull out a couple pieces of the actual cutting wheel. Let me see if I can find it. I wasn't sure what happened to the, I can't even see this thing. There we go. I wasn't sure what happened to the cutting wheel, if it had blown apart or whatnot, but they did pull a couple of these chunks out of my incision. They got it flushed out and then got me 8 stitches. And now the kind of the funny part of this story is, and not to be any more gruesome than I already have been, but when the doctor first went to go look at it, he kind of spread it apart a little bit to see if there was debris in there. And as he did, there was a little, shooter that kind of got him. So he immediately closed it back up, held pressure to it. He went to go prepare the suture cart, told the nurse to hold pressure to it. And she goes, "All right, I'm gonna lay you back and then raise you up." And I said, "Okay." And, I thought I was applying pressure to it as we were on our way to the emergency room. And apparently what I was doing was not applying pressure because these guys were really pushing directly, like it felt like into my soul. And so the nurse is holding on to it, and their gurneys that they have are not electric lift. They've got a foot jack, right? So picture me laying down on the table here. She's got her finger applying serious pressure into this brand new flesh wound. And at the same time, she's pushing the floor jack of the gurney up, and I could feel every pulse of her hitting that floor jack, raising me up. But I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, "Can you guys please get electric lifts? This is terrible." So I have a couple new takeaways from this accident. First and foremost is I have a newfound respect for this tool right here. Again, it's not something that I use regularly. I definitely use a chainsaw more often. I really only use this for sharpening mower blades with an actual grinding wheel, not a cutoff wheel. And then also whenever I do cut IBC totes open to store our firewood with, I will take the grinding wheel and grind all those burrs off so they're not so sharp when you're reaching in and out of the baskets. But this was something that I had too much confidence in using. And number 2, I don't think this tool should ever be operated one hand. And I see people on YouTube all the time using these things one-handed, and never thought anything of it before, but now it scares the bejesus out of me. Number 3 is I'm probably going to get rid of this style of angle grinder. I'll probably get one that is battery powered and has a trigger on it. So if it does jump out of my hands like that, at least the stopping motion or the stopping process has started before it hits you. Number 4 is I will not be using an angle grinder to cut things like PTO shafts anymore, or anything cylindrical or square tubing or anything that is thick. In talking with neighbor Doug, he said really the best tool for the job for that would be a portable bandsaw, or like I've done it in the past, just use a Sawzall with a metal cutting blade. Even though it takes longer, it's clearly much safer, no chance of kickback with a Sawzall. Number 5 would be people have left safety comments in the past on our YouTube channel whenever we're doing woodworking stuff with the joiner, planer, table saw, talking about loose fitting clothing or hoodie strings or anything. And I'm always like, how that probably doesn't happen all that often. But I'll tell you what, this is the first time I've had a piece of clothing get sucked into a power tool. And I was wearing a t-shirt, and a fairly tight-fitting t-shirt. It wasn't a loose, baggy t-shirt either. So this was definitely eye-opening for me for clothing getting sucked into equipment. Luckily, it was a small tool like this that isn't as powerful as you know, a 2 horsepower, 3 horsepower planer or joiner or table saw. I don't know as though a t-shirt, it would probably get sucked in, but I don't know if it would be enough to bind up the motor like this did here. So I feel incredibly lucky that a small motor got bound up with my t-shirt versus a larger motor that would have sucked me in and the motor would have kept spinning. So anyway, I think that pretty much wraps up my angle grinder story. I'm sure we will get comments of people saying, oh, this guy's an idiot. He doesn't know how to use power tools. He got what he deserved. And you know what? I expect those comments. But like I said, the whole reason for making this video is if I can prevent one person from going out there and using this style of angle grinder, or using it one-handed, or using it to cut something like this and having a similar accident or worse, then it would have been worth it. I know people always dramatize this kind of stuff that say, oh, if it was 2 inches to the left or 2 inches up or whatever, it could have been a lot worse. And you know, I'm going to be guilty of that here. But again, we talked about if it had hit me here first, that would have been a lot worse. Or if it had hit me in the neck, I mean, literally from here up to my neck is only, what, 6 or 7 inches, and hit an artery or something, it could have been a lot worse. Or worse than that, hit me right here in the moneymaker. I mean, I use this thing for YouTube, right? Now, all that being said, where it did hit me is actually pretty funny. And, you know, we're getting close to showing the picture here, so you're going to see it. But it literally hit me right in the upper part of my nipple. So I can't make this stuff up. I thought, you know, Kyle from Spicer Designs would get a kick out of where it hit me. He's a pretty big nipple guy. But yeah, so that's the story. I'm going to give you guys a 5-second countdown. If you don't want to see my chest cut open from an angle grinder, click off of the video right now.